Hey folks, I'm solo this week. This is Greg Siskind, and I'm here to talk to you about this week in immigration law. I also have my I voted sticker. I just came from the polls, and I hope that if those of you who are U.S. citizens, go and vote and make your voice heard. Okay, so what happened this week in immigration? There were, as always, a lot of developments. I don't think there were sort of the blockbusters that we would typically see, but there are a few important ones. And I wanted to start out because this seems to be where a lot of the news is every week on temporary protected status. So um, I think the biggest news story of the week on TPS involves TPS for Haitians, and because something new happened, which is Congress actually took a step to do something about the president's efforts to cancel every TPS program that is in existence. We talked about it last week that a something called a discharge petition passed, and a discharge petition is when a majority of members of the House of Representatives sign off on basically a petition telling the Speaker of the House that they want to bring up to the floor something that they want to vote on. Normally, the Speaker and the majority party has total control over what gets voted on and what doesn't get voted on. So this discharge petition basically said it was a legislation to extend TPS for 350,000 Haitians who are in that status right now. They and that passed last week. The discharge petition. This week, it passed actually on the House floor, 224 to 204. So close, but not that close. And it tells you that there is at least the even with the Republicans having control of the House, there is support for that program. Now, is this going to pass in the Senate? Probably not. The Senate itself is got a somewhat better vote, a better majority for the Republicans. They have a 3-vote majority over there. And yes, there probably are a couple of Republicans that might be interested, but then it would have to go to President Trump, who would have to basically he'll veto it, of course, and that would have to be overridden with the 2/3 vote. So it's largely a symbolic vote at this point, but it does at least show that the president's policies are not supported by at least one house in Congress. There was other news relating to TPS in the last couple of days. So one of them was there's a Supreme Court case called Amiot v. MIOT versus Trump. I don't know if I pronounced that right, where the Supreme Court is going to hear arguments on whether the administration can terminate TPS designations. In this case, it's going to be about Haitians and Syrians, and that is the reason why courts have been reluctant to, especially with this administration, which seems to be the main one that tries to go out and terminate programs, um, is even though it's very easy for the president to designate a country for TPS, and the president has a lot of discretion to do that, the courts have held that the president still has to show that there's a process and that the conditions that led to the creation of TPS are no longer uh, that are no longer there. And this administration has made very little effort to try and justify why TPS was being revoked for one country and another. Haiti is a good example of that. The situation in Haiti is bad, and it's been bad for a long time, and there haven't been appreciable improvements there, which is evidenced by the fact that the U.S. puts very serious travel warnings for Americans not to go there unless they take great precautions. So that's what the Supreme Court is going to decide: is how much executive authority the administration has, not just to designate TPS, but whether they can, whether they have unfettered discretion, essentially, to remove that designation. How do I think it'll go? I think that uh, you know, the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court does seem to be, concerned when there are, uh, when every court is going against them, but it hasn't stopped them from making a decision. Honestly, I'm not sure which way that one's going to go, but we will see. Uh, in other TPS news, there was there's a federal court. As I was telling you that the courts step in here. A federal judge blocked TPS termination for Ethiopia, and they said that the administration failed to follow that statutory process we were talking about, which is demonstrating that they have that the situation that led to the conditions that led to TPS being designated have actually gone away, and has the administration provided the evidence of that and gone through any kind of process for that? We know they haven't done that. The question is what level of process that they have to go through, and how much deference does the administration get on that? And at this point, so the that case was just decided in the last week. And then the last thing that was in the TPS news, I think this is the last thing I had on my list to mention, was that there was a report that just came out that was published in the Guardian that said TPS holders contribute $29 billion to the US economy every year. So those who think that the TPS program is, just a charity program, there's some data that suggests otherwise. So they contribute that much in terms of their output. They also pay about $8 billion in taxes every year to the U.S. So that's news on TPS for the week. As far as other news that's happening, there is another Supreme Court case that was argued this week on a subject that honestly I think a lot of people probably weren't following this case and didn't hear that much about it. And I don't think it got that much chatter amongst immigration lawyers either. But this is a case where the Supreme Court heard oral arguments about stripping green cards from people that show up at a port of entry. And basically, the question is whether the president has the authority to take away a returning resident's green card and admit them instead on parole. With the government was arguing that it doesn't have to meet a clear and convincing evidence standard. So in the past, at least it's not that rare for somebody to show up at a port of entry with a green card, and then an officer to take the position that you have to show that you have an abandoned permanent residency. This is advice that I've been counseling clients, for my whole career. For 35 years, we've been having this conversation over and over again, that you can be deemed to have abandoned your permanent status if you have been outside the U.S. for extended periods of time and you really don't have strong ties to the U.S. anymore. Now, with that being said, if you come to the U.S. and you have an unexpired green card, but you have been outside for a long period of time, you do have a right to go in front of a judge if an officer takes the position that you've abandoned your status. And I think what this case is saying is that they have the right to strip it on their own without that level of due process. That's and by the way, it's usually, career-wise for me, my recollection is that it doesn't come up that often, but when it has come up, usually they offer a visitor status, and then a person that, we usually counsel people that if you really don't care, take the visitor status and come in if you really think that you're not going to be wanting to remain in the United States anymore. And there are reasons why people don't want to stay in the United States aside from the political stuff. I mean, sometimes there are tax reasons. Sometimes people have family in other places. Sometimes careers have moved on in other ways. But the CBP has to go through a process in order to strip a person of that status. And you would normally have the right to go in front of a judge. Now, that might mean that you are spending a weekend in airport jail, essentially waiting to get that emergency hearing with the judge. But this is a case saying whether CBP can go further than that and essentially doesn't need to give you that process and can just make a decision unilaterally. At least that's my impression of what this case is about. So that case was argued Wednesday. There are usually only about 3 or 4 cases at the most that are immigration related, that the Supreme Court will decide in a session. Sometimes they will also issue decisions that are from the shadow docket, where essentially they're making decisions about cases that are at a lower level, that where there's an attempt to by a district court to do something, or a circuit court to do something, and the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court's gotten involved in a couple of those issues that involve immigration. But generally speaking, there's not that many of those cases that come up. So this is an important one. We've talked about 2 of them so far: Haiti TPS and the and this green card case. And we also know, of course, we have birthright citizenship. My prediction on the birthright citizenship case is it will be one of the last cases that is decided by the court, which usually wraps everything up in June. Sometimes it'll stretch into early July, like I think it did last year. And that we'll get a decision on birthright citizenship. So far, all indications are that it's going to be a loss for the administration, but who knows? Okay, third story. There was an interesting development, a legal development in Minnesota. I don't think that I think we all remember vividly what happened in Minnesota a couple months ago. But this is a development involving the state courts, where there is a state court and local prosecutors have charged an ICE officer with 2 counts of second-degree assault with a dangerous weapon. So I don't know if there have been other cases since Trump came in where a state court and a local prosecutor have tried to prosecute ICE agents that claim that they were acting, doing their jobs. And the question is, does your job allow you to essentially, does it give you immunity from committing crimes under state laws? And I think we're going to find out in Minnesota whether that's the case. But that is that's a case that we'll certainly want to watch. Next, I had on my list, ICE has announced that for fiscal year 2026 and 2027, that they have a target of 1 million deportations. I believe that's over the course of 2 years, not 1 year. And that would be a substantial increase in deportations over what we've seen in recent years. I don't think that's actually more than President Obama did, but I think the big issue is not so much deportations as the number of detentions. I think is certainly higher than it's been. But that's that was another stories I wanted to call attention to. And speaking of ICE detentions, something I have been posting about on my social media feeds is that ICE detention, for all of the PR that we hear from ICE about how wonderful detention is, they have had they've had report after report about abuses that have happened there. But this week there was, just since the beginning of this year, and we're only in the 4th month of the year, that they just reported their 16th detainee death. And that is it's basically been averaging more than one a week. It's about one every week, which is crazy compared to what numbers we've seen in years past. So I think that's a factor of how many people are in detention, but it's also a factor. It's also reflects what we know to be happening, which is that the standards in these facilities are not good. And there's a lot of violence in these facilities, and we're not getting. And there's, I think that one of the reasons why they're not allowing members of Congress to basically go in and inspect it without a lot of notice is because they know the conditions are bad, and they're basically trying to keep this information from the public. Um, Finally, well, I think this was the last one I had on the list that I wanted to report on was there's a notice of proposed rulemaking um, that was issued a couple weeks ago, and I don't know if we had a chance to talk about it, but the comment period is we're in the middle of it right now, and this is a proposed rulemaking on DOL prevailing wages for perm applications, as well as, sorry, I have to read this, H-1Bs, H-1B1s, E3s as well. Um, it's a way that the Department of Labor wants to recalculate what a prevailing wage should be, and on average, it would raise the prevailing wage by $14,000 a year, with the steepest increases for entry level workers. Um, I think if you are in a if you're you know you're in if you're working with an employer or an immigration lawyer that works with particular industries, it would pay for you to do some research about how much of an impact it would have on your clients. But the comments are due by May 26th. And if you're an ALA member, they, I believe, have information about making comments, but anybody can make a comment from the public, and you do not have to be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. You can make a comment just as a participant in the public discourse. You have free speech. You're in the United States, so I would recommend doing that. About an hour and a half ago, or I guess it was about 2 hours ago, sorry, I was on a live stream with Chuck Cook and Zach New, and we were talking about the various lawsuits that we are working on. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I will say the common theme amongst these suits that we filed, we have a suit on the 75 country visa ban. We have two suits on the 39 country benefits policy, USCIS. We have sued over the $100,000 H-1B fee. We have a suit on, we have a DACA suit, and we have a suit on student visa revocations. Anyway, a number of those suits, the common theme was judges. In many of those cases, the judges are the last thing we had on that case is done, and we've already made our arguments to the judge, and they're in a position to make a decision. We're just waiting. So my prediction would probably be we'll hear on the Georgia 39 country benefits pause case and the H-1B case within the next couple days. But I have been saying that for weeks that those cases are going to be decided soon. So that's about all I can tell you on that. But I would tell you to keep an eye out. I do think one of those cases is probably going to be decided any minute now. And I'm kind of like every time I'm looking at my email, I'm looking to see if something came from the court on those particular cases. Just have one question, and it involves a bill that got introduced to exempt physicians from the $100,000 fee. Do I think it has any mileage? Actually, I don't. I'm hoping that it won't matter because this H-1B fee will be gone soon. But I always think doctors are good politics, and every time I've lobbied for physician immigration issues over the last many decades, I always get a relatively positive reception from congressional offices, and then I get let down as far as those offices actually willing to do anything about it. And it seems like there are um, there were forces in the Democratic Party that were blocking a lot of immigration bills when they were trying to get a big immigration reform bill passed. That's ended several years ago, and now with the Republicans, it seems like if it's not enforcement, they're not interested, even if there seems to be broad support for a particular bill, even amongst Republicans. We've seen with physician immigration bills in the past that, and I've been involved with it, where they will release and they will have, they'll announce new sponsors of a bill every week, and they will announce one Republican sponsor, one Democratic sponsor, just to make the point that it's a bipartisan bill. They're not controversial, and they're widely supported. So the issue usually comes down to, at least for that, whether the administration is going, it has a problem with it or not. And I think the administration has a problem with just about every immigration bill that's considered pro-immigration. So I'm not super optimistic. I wish there was better news on that. I am happy that in our H-1B case, we have at least one of the class representatives is a physician employer, and we had a number of physician plaintiffs in our case, just to emphasize the point that the $100,000 fee really hurts. Not doc. I mean, it hurts doctors, obviously, but it really hurts Americans that are denied access to healthcare in many parts of the country because they're not getting these doctors. So I think the politics are good. I just, as far as it goes, but I think that there are forces high up in Congress and in the White House that are going to make it difficult for that bill to move. But that would be a good one for a discharge petition if there was going to be an effort for that. It still would have the same problems that any of these other bills have. But by the way, the discharge petition, though, the one success this year that we've seen with the discharge petition was with the Epstein files, which that passed. There were like 4 Republicans that signed on to that, and as soon as it passed the House, the administration, I think, got really nervous about the politics, and then all of a sudden it passed. But to answer the question on discharge petition, we were talking about it earlier. If a majority of members of the House of Representatives decides that they signs off on this petition to bring a bill to the House floor, the Senate has to, the House Speaker has to allow for that to happen. And we were talking earlier that the discharge petition passed. We got enough votes last week, and this week there was a vote to extend TPS for Haiti for another year. So it was one of the rare examples of a discharge petition succeeding. Unfortunately, that's still going to be a very tough bill to get moving. But that is a discharge petitions usually work better when the president is supportive. But I'm glad that it happened. But that's the discharge petition is helpful, but it doesn't really solve the bigger problem, which is that they don't have 2/3 votes, which is what they need to get past a presidential veto. So I will end there, and I'll be back next week. I think Elisa Taub is joining me next week, so we'll probably save your doctor questions up for Elisa. She and I co-write the physician immigration handbook, and I know that if you have those issues, if you want to talk about it, I should have that chat. So I'm going to end, and we'll see everybody next week. Hopefully, take it easy. Bye.